Greetings, race community. Brent coming in live from Narragansett, Rhode Island, in an actual home. And I say that because for some of you listening, you've been on this RV adventure with me and my family over the last 10 months. We covered 12,000 miles, 33 states, and actually put our kids into school on May 6th for their first day of school. So the trip is over, but a new journey is beginning. It has been great to have more predictable Wi-Fi, running water, and electricity at all times. And I'm really excited to welcome today's guest, Amy Noah, Vice President and Chief Advancement Officer for the University of Oklahoma Foundation. Welcome, Amy.
Hello, it's good to be here. Thank you for the opportunity.
Well, Amy, one of her real claims to fame is that she led the $2.5 billion capital campaign at Purdue. And I just have to call that out right away because it's the best named capital campaign in history. It was called Ever True. And I had the opportunity of visiting Purdue when that campaign was going on. And it felt like there was a real welcoming committee because Ever True was just written all over the campus. And I did go on to learn that Ever True at Purdue is one of the lyrics in the school fight song. And it is also the name of Brown's fight song, Ever True to Brown, which is where our company's name came from. So that was just a fun coincidence. And Amy, if I recall, your license plate even read Ever True.
It did. I'll always claim that of all the visits you might have ever made, Brent, we were the only place that could provide you a complete wrapped bus with the words Ever True on it. But yeah, we had a lot of fun with it. It was special and unique to our campus, like you described in the case of Brown, because of the fight song connection.
Well, we're going to dive into that, but I want to rewind a bit first. And one of my favorite questions for my guests has been just to learn a little bit about your own journey to higher education, because I think so many of us who end up in the advancement space, it's somehow connected to our own college decision, experiences that we had as students and so forth. And so take me back to junior year of high school. Amy, who was that person? What was she into? And did you know that you wanted to attend Purdue?
Yeah, I had an interest in Purdue for a variety of reasons. The town that I was from in Indiana, many of my classmates had an interest in IU. And there was always that fun school rivalry. But for me, it was really just about an opportunity to distance myself from home a little bit and to explore a campus and a part of the state that I wasn't familiar with. So that was why I decided on Purdue as an undergraduate. And really, it wasn't about my junior and senior year of high school when I made that decision. When my family visited at Purdue, my dad was a diehard IU fan. So I remember him saying that it was going to pain him greatly to have to send checks to Purdue University, but he did it for many years. So,
And so it felt like a little bit of getting away from home, even though you're staying in state. Did you love it right away when you got there? Did it take some time to get used to? I mean, what was your student experience like?
Yes, I absolutely loved it. Like a lot of incoming freshmen, I lived in a dorm, made some really deep and meaningful relationships with people who I've stayed in touch with, ironically, since all that time ago. But yeah, it was just a special place. There was a real sense of community. And even though there were, at that time, probably 35,000 students on campus, it never felt big. It was a place that even when you went to class, you would always see people you knew, you would always make connections, and those connections carried through in your years of study. And so, yeah, it felt comfortable to me from the very beginning.
And were there any, did you have clarity around what you wanted to study? I mean, rarely do folks sign up freshman year thinking they want to be a chief advancement officer someday, but did you have any exposure to the philanthropy world as you started the experience?
Not a lot. I did have student classmates and friends who worked at the call center, the student call center. I myself did not, but I did have them in my life at that time. And many of them talked about their experience. And I did think it was super interesting to hear them talk about it. And I will suggest that that's probably where I really first started thinking about philanthropy, not because of my own personal connections, but because of my classmates who were working at the call center at Purdue.
So how did your friends describe that, actually? I'm curious to know kind of what their pitch was to you, if it was a pitch or if it was more just kind of friends catching up and passing.
I specifically remember two examples. I had actually a roommate who was involved with the call center at Purdue at the time, and she was so taken back by the fact that she was talking to people across the country every night who had had incredible pasts and had done really interesting things, and that they were giving back to Purdue. She just said, I just didn't know people would do that. So it was probably my first introduction to the higher ed space of philanthropy. I certainly was familiar with it through my own childhood, and people who, give to their church or give to medical causes or those kinds of things. I certainly had that familiarity, but that was the first example. And then the second example was I had a classmate, and we weren't close friends, but we were close enough that we were involved in a couple group projects. And she actually shared with all of us that she had talked with an individual the evening before who had named one of the large lecture halls that we sat in. And so she said, did you guys ever notice the name on the front of the lecture hall? And most of us said no. And she said, well, I have to tell you, I talked to that person last night. There's a real person. And so she really kind of brought that story to life. And it really struck me. And
so to be clear, she spoke to the donor in the context of working at a call center.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How do we feel about that? Is that okay? Like, do we let the building naming donors just get called in the live bunts list, or how does that work?
Well, so I'm going to out myself now. I remember specifically her talking about that. Fast forward, I left, I graduated, went and did some work, came back and was working in fundraising at Purdue. And I couldn't quite remember the name of that lecture hall. To be honest, I couldn't. So I went and walked over one day on my lunch and looked it up. And I thought, I'm going to look in the system and look this individual up. So there was a note in the contact reports, believe it or not, there was a note that this individual had asked specifically not to be removed from the call center numbers because he loved hearing from young people.
Wow.
And he always, I guess he had a habit, he didn't need to be called often. And I think there was some timeline in which he suggested how frequent he would be called, but he always used his credit card because student callers would get a bonus if they could get the gift on a credit card. And he always gave $1,000 to any of the student callers.
I love it. I love it. Good follow-up. The fact that you tracked that down is impressive. And so you already kind of hinted at immediately after college. I'm not familiar with what you did right after school before you got into the advancement realm.
Sure. I went to work in industry. So I was working at a large corporation, TRW. It was local. It was within the West Lafayette community. And I was working in purchasing, so contract negotiation and a lot of relationship piece of work there. So I did that for about 6 years after I graduated.
And when did you start thinking about getting back to either Purdue specifically or higher education or fundraising? I mean, how did it get on your radar?
Yeah. Well, like most college towns, you can't live in Lafayette or West Lafayette and not feel like there's this constant reminder of this really great thing happening over here at this university. And so I certainly didn't ever lose sight of like, wow, it would be really wonderful and full circle to have an opportunity to work at Purdue. But what happened is Martin Jischke arrived on campus in July of 2000 and quickly launched a capital campaign. And it was in the paper, it was on the news, it was in everywhere that you turned. And there was an incredible marketing effort around that initiative. And so I had a couple of friends that worked at the university at the time, and they reached out and they said, here's your chance, you really ought to do it. And so I tiptoed into it, and look what happened.
And when you think about those early days, sort of moving from industry, I mean, obviously in a negotiation sort of capacity, and there's a lot of negotiation involved in the fundraising realm, but did it feel like an immediate, this is my calling? I'm going to be doing this for, the rest of my career, or did it take a while to just hit your stride?
I guess it's kind of a little of both, to be honest, Brent. So I selected corporate fundraising very deliberately because I thought that would be a more natural transition, and I was very familiar with large corporations and sort of the structure of such. So I did start in that space, but the flip of it is there's a lot to learn in this profession, like most professions, but there's a lot to learn and a lot to really experience and a lot to perfect. And so in the beginning, it was hard. It was really hard. And I questioned whether I would be successful. And I would like to believe there's probably not a fundraiser alive that wouldn't have said the same thing about themselves. You do question, can I do this work? Can I do this year after year? Can I raise the kinds of dollars that are being expected? And can I be successful? So it was hard, but yet it always just felt very rewarding, and it felt very natural to me to be at a place that I had graduated then to be asking people to provide support. So it was a natural, but it was hard. I don't want to underscore the effort that it took to learn how to be a good fundraiser and to really build a skill set that could carry me forward.
And so if you could go back in time and sit that Amy down and say, hey, look, we're just going to cut to the chase here. There's like 1, 2, or 3 things you really should know right away. What would those, I don't know, lessons, or maybe you just needed to go through the trials and tribulations and do the work, but are there any generalizable themes that you feel like you would have benefited to know earlier in your career?
To some extent, I think always first and foremost is to be a good listener. And that's not always something people learn. I think people get better at it or sometimes get worse at it. But I think it's important to be a good listener always in the work that we do. The other thing that I think I hadn't given thought to, but it certainly became very critical and very important to me when I thought about what it was going to take to be successful, was my ability to anticipate. So when I was in conversations with people and I was trying to be attentive and listen and pick up on all those clues and all those hints that might lead to something more significant in the relationship or in the path of philanthropy, there was also a really healthy dosage of, you need to be able to anticipate either what people are thinking or what people might think or what might move this relationship forward. And I think being able to really get better in that space allowed me an opportunity to be more successful.
As you think about those early years, and I'm sure we have, many early career fundraisers listening who love hearing from folks like you that have developed such a strong track record and have had all the highs and lows that go along with it. Were there moments early on that either strike you as being really challenging or demoralizing, or on the other hand, just early wins or victories that, I don't know, made you more excited about the longer term prospects?
I'll say something really interesting about the profession, and like a lot of professions, it's very hierarchical. So I started as an entry-level fundraiser, and I remember walking into a room of 100 or 150 other fundraising professionals, not all fundraisers, but many, and it allowed some doubt to creep into my mind. It really kind of intimidated me. It worked against me a few times because I let it get in my head. And so I think to young people and to people that are just really starting out in the profession, I think the best thing you can really do, and I wish in hindsight I had been more deliberate about it, was rather than let that paint an idea or an impression for me, I think I would have probably been better served to just get back to my desk, just put my nose down and work really hard. Because the work, if you invest and if you do just all the right things, it will pay off in spades. And it's just an incredible profession in which you can really define your own path. And so I think I probably early on allowed a couple of those really successful fundraisers to get into some real estate in my head. And in hindsight, I probably should have just played my game and played it well and stayed the course. But fortunately, I had enough success that I was able to figure that out pretty quickly. And it did allow me later, as my relationship changed and I became supervisor to some of the individuals that I described, or I became a peer, I felt a little more confident because I had the results and I could speak to that. And the work allows you to do that.
So what were some of the ingredients to generating the results? Is it work ethic? Is it attitude? Is it some skill set development? Confidence? What was it for you where you really started to feel like things clicked?
Yeah. Well, I think this is absolutely a profession where if you're expecting somebody to tap you on the shoulder every day and tell you what to do, you're probably not going to be successful. It's just not designed like that. So I think work ethic is a big part of it. But at the end of the day, I kind of built my strategy around two fundamental pieces. I knew early on that it was going to be hard for me to reach my dollar goals, and especially those first 12 months. I thought I'm not going to be able to run out of the gate and reach that dollar goal because they were ambitious goals. And so what I decided to do is if the goal for making visits was X, I was going to make 2 times X. Because I felt like if I could defend my cause, I could at least say, I might not have reached the dollar visit, but I made contact with a lot of people, and I think I moved some relationships forward. And what that did was it paid off over the years, because when I had made a lot more visits in those early years and then later, I had a lot of those relationships just based on history. And so I think that is a place where people get all wrapped up around the number in our business. And of course, that's the part that people think about when they measure. But I think really it is about visits. It must be about getting yourself in front of as many people as you possibly can in a given period of time. And then, the other piece about this, and I probably because of the place that I learned at Purdue and a large institution with a couple really successful colleges, I really focused on the people that nobody else was talking about. So what tends to happen in philanthropy and in large higher ed institutions is there's a handful of prospects that we all know. We all hear the names, we talk about their names are on buildings or they've named professorships. And I just decided, we can all sit at the table and fight over getting a little bit more from those individuals and figure out what our space is. Or I would just identify people that nobody else was talking to, and I didn't feel crowded in my relationship with those individuals, and I could just own it, and I could present a united front to them because they really hadn't been contacted by other individuals. And so I really did a lot of discovery work, and I'm glad I did. It was the funnest of times, and it really did pay off. And those are the relationships that many years later, I would hear from individuals and they would say, hey, I looked and you're still at Purdue, so I thought I would call you. And so I think there's a lot to be said for that, and especially for people who are just getting started in the field.
So, and it seems like those two strategies go hand in hand. One, let's identify essentially the prospects that are sort of maybe hidden in plain sight in certain regards, but just not getting the same level of attention. And two, let's get a lot of shots on goal. Let's just get the conversations. Let's do the visits. And I guess the third piece, though, was because you were able to really have such a strong tenure at one institution that, in a sector where there is so much turnover, as time went on, you started getting inbounds from some of those same people where maybe it took years for them to get to a spot where they wanted to step up, at that level. And so it sounds like that was a part of the success as well.
Absolutely. I definitely think, and this is what, it's not, I'm not gonna say it's a great trouble for me, but it certainly is something that I'm struck by in the profession. There's a lot of movement. People get distracted by what's shiny and bright, and that could be in a bigger title or just a little bit more money. And I remind people, every time you take a new assignment, you're starting over. I mean, you're starting with 0 relationships and you have to build those. And so I tend to appreciate those individuals who really stay within an organization or stay placed within a spot within the organization, to really, even though it would have been easier or more exciting or maybe more attractive at times to take a different position, I think there's some real value. It's certainly important to our external stakeholders. And if we all want to say, and if we mean it, that we do this work because of the donors, and I hope that most people can say that, it's better for them when you stay put. They don't like that revolving door. They don't like calling the office and somebody new answering. They build a relationship with you and they see you as the face of the institution. And so I think the stability that you bring when you stay rooted in an assignment, it has amazing ripple effect. And so I'm a fan of that, although I know it doesn't happen as much as it could. And maybe I'm a fan of that because I had 18 years at one place, but
Right.
Nonetheless, I am a fan.
So just back to your 2 pillars for one moment. Identify quality prospects that aren't getting the attention that they should, and then do a ton of visits. Like, those are pretty sound strategies. Why would you, why isn't that just the standard? Why might somebody even debate that or disagree with that recommendation?
Well, in the case of identifying your own prospects, I think to some people it can be a little daunting to imagine that, okay, I'm going to start this relationship from ground zero.
So you weren't afraid of the cold lead. I mean, maybe not ice cold, but not like they were a known,
Yeah.
philanthropic supporter at a major gift level, let's say.
No, I actually prefer those individuals when you look in the system and there were no contact reports. Those were my favorite.
I love it.
Because you weren't going to have to call and ask a colleague for permission to go make a visit or to get an ask in front of somebody. Chances are you were going to be one of the first people to talk to those individuals about the institution, the first point of connection that they may have had in many years. And so I found it easier to get visits with people like that. In fact, I always do believe that, and maybe that I'd love to know that if there's research on this, and I should probably read more about it. But I have to believe that the people that don't hear from the institution are much more responsive to a first visit, as opposed to the people that hear pretty consistently from a cast of different development officers and everybody wanting an appointment. I think they might feel a little abused by that. And so I tend to believe that those individuals who haven't, and I heard that often when I would write to somebody and say, hey, I'm going to be in Seattle, would love to visit with you, hear what your time has been since you left the university. Would you be open to it? And it was, I'd say probably at least almost half of the time people would say, you're the first person that's ever reached out to me from Purdue. I'm really excited to hear from you. Love to have a visit.
Love it. Well, you don't have an 18-year experience and all those visits without having some interesting stories along the way. Is it true that one time somebody delivered horses to you at your building, just showed up ready to gift horses?
Yes, actually. A gentleman I knew, he was from Illinois, wonderful, wonderful person. I had been in communication with him about a gift, just probably 4 or 5, we had probably met 4 or 5 times. And he called me and said, I'm out front. Can you come out front? And I said, how are you out front? Because there really wasn't a place to park in front of our building. It was really just a pull in for the buses. And so he said, well, I need you to hurry because I'm out front. And I was like, okay, that's odd because the buses are not too patient with people who pull in. So I go down there and he's down there with a huge horse trailer. And I said, oh, wow, what are you doing? And he was like, well, I'm here to make a gift. So I thought he meant write a check. And I said, oh, okay. Well, how do you want to handle, what are you thinking? And he goes, well, it's that. And he pointed and I was like, it's what? And there was, I don't know, 6, 8 horses. And he said, those are some of my finest. And I said, I thought he was kidding. And I said, what are you talking about? And he goes, we have a vet school, right? And I said, yes, because we treat sick animals, but we don't accept gifts of animals. And he said, well, they're worth a lot of money. And I said, I trust you, but we're not in the business of acquiring livestock. And so we had to work through that a little bit and he came to understand it, but it turned out he was in a life event and he was trying to liquidate some things kind of quickly. And so I said, I think you're probably a little emotional right now. Let's kind of step back and think about what's the right thing for you. So, pretty funny though. I mean, his heart was in the right place. He meant well. In his mind, he had connected Purdue and a vet school, and he thought that this would be something we would want. And I was like, well, we don't have a pasture for those, and we certainly can't race those. And so I'm not sure what value they would have. So,
I mean, have you ever thought of just having a drive-through window right there at the foundation?
Exactly.
Love it. And then I read the other, you'd shared one time that you met with an angry donor who refused to give because of a parking ticket.
Yeah.
But you stuck with him?
We did. It's funny. He agreed to the visit and was pretty warm in the email communication. So I went into it thinking it was going to be a good visit. I'm not going to say that I thought it was going to be off the charts, but I thought it would be good. And as soon as I got there, he was so angry. And he had the parking ticket. He actually put it on the desk and he said, can you believe this? And so what had happened is, I later learned because he had the parking ticket, they had encumbered his diploma at the end. So his parents came back. If he told the story, and if I understood it all correctly, his parents came back to graduation to see him graduate, and he walked across stage, but he didn't get a diploma because of the parking ticket. he earned it and he had the credits, but the university was going to withhold the diploma. And so he had to explain that to his dad on the way home. And so he was furious. So his dad, of course, came back and tried to rectify it and did, and made it right with the university. But to this gentleman, he was embarrassed that he had to tell his father, and he was embarrassed that his father had to pay this $30 parking ticket. And he just thought it was ridiculous. And so he had harbored all this ill will for many, many years. And so he went off on, quite a rant. We talked about it. I finally just asked him, I said, would you prefer I leave? And he said, yeah, I think I would. And I said, okay. So I left, and I followed up with him. I did not write him an email purposely because I didn't want to get into a dialogue. I handwrote him a note. And I said that I really appreciated him sharing his concerns. And most importantly, I understood that it had to be very embarrassing for him. And for that, I was sorry. But that I hoped we would stay in touch. And so I wrote to him about a year later in an email and said, I'm going to be back in Boston. Would you be open to a visit? And he said, you really want to see me again? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, what if I go down that same path? And I said, well, then that'll be your choice. So when I got there, he mentioned it, but he was a little past it. And then ultimately he did make a significant gift.
I am most surprised that you decided to try for the second visit.
Yeah, he was a nice guy.
But isn't it fair to say most folks would have just disqualified and maybe written him off? Or was there something where you felt like it really was worth it? Or are you just a glutton for punishment? Because how many times have you said, would you like me to leave? And they say yes.
It's kind of silly, but I remember when I left and I got my car, I thought, well, I'm going to give him some time to cool off, but I am going to try to visit him again because I knew I would be back in Boston. The biggest reason is because when I said, would you like for me to leave? And he said, yes. I said, I'm happy to do that. And he said, well, I do appreciate that you listened to me today. And I thought to myself, he's not really that hard of an individual. He just had to be heard. So there was something about his tone and the way he said it. And he literally stood up and walked me to the door and he said goodbye. And in my mind, I thought, if he would have just sat there or he would have slammed the door or any of those things, I would have probably maybe thought differently. But it was just that he said, I really appreciate you listening. So in my mind, I took that as his sign that there was some closure for him. Maybe all bad. He did. I think it's important to note that when he did eventually tell me he was going to make a gift, he said, it's probably not as big as you think it should be, but it's going to be the gift that I feel comfortable doing. He said, I'm going to make a significant gift. It's significant by my standards, and it was a significant gift. He said, now I want to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. I would like to create a fund for other students who have parking tickets that aren't paid. And he asked if the university would be open to that. I said, well, not exactly. And you can imagine lots of reasons why. But I said, well, what if we just direct it to the emergency fund that's available at the university? And that helps for a variety of reasons. Parking tickets could be one of them. But it's really more students who have a crisis. And I said, wouldn't that feel maybe like a better way to use your money? And he said, yeah, I could accept that. So.
Wow. I love that story. And it almost sounds like, you reference the gentleman with the horse trailer and this individual who just needed to be heard. It almost sounds like part of the job is therapist. I don't know if you ever felt that way, but
probably more with my staff, to be honest. I think if you find yourself in the profession and you manage people, you have to imagine that fundraisers collectively are they're very sensitive. They're very compassionate. They care deeply. They're very much people pleasers. And so I probably felt a little bit more like I offered support in more of a therapy way for some of the fundraisers that I worked with.
Well, let's talk about that, because ultimately you had the opportunity to go from advancement newcomer to successful fundraiser to leader of a big organization. And take me back to maybe some of those early moments when you were named vice president at Purdue. And I've been in your all staff meetings. That was a big group. And were you feeling confident, overwhelmed? I mean, what was the sort of mix of emotions when you stepped in to take over the campaign?
I recall very, very clearly what April 1st, 2013 felt like. It was a really interesting day, but it was the day that I was appointed interim vice president at Purdue. And I had probably next to no answers for what we were going to do or what needed to be done because I hadn't thought about it. I hadn't seen myself in that capacity. It happened very suddenly. And so it put me in a position where I was standing within a couple hours in front of, 150 people to let them know that I had been asked to take this assignment. And I just was honest with them. I said, look, there's a lot of work to do. We're going to do really great things. I'm confident. I believe all of you are the right people for all the right reasons. But I don't have a recipe. I don't know exactly what this is going to look and feel like. So I need you to be patient and I need you to be kind. And I need you to understand that I'm going to ask a lot of you. And I'll hopefully give as much to you as you give. And so I just remember at the end of those words, I was standing there staring at this room full of people, feeling probably pretty overwhelmed. And one of my colleagues stood up and said, "Thank you for taking this assignment." And I was so struck by her words. She's since retired from Purdue. She's somebody I still stay in touch with, but I was really touched by the fact that she was thanking me. It hadn't occurred to me that anyone would think that was an appropriate response, but it certainly was from her heart. And I could tell that when she spoke it. And it was just, to me, honestly, it was the perfect storm because I was going to get to work with people I knew, people who had been seated at tables with me in many, many, many conversations, who I'd seen close gifts, I'd seen be successful. And to get to be involved with people at that level is incredible in and of itself. But then to get to say that I get to lead a team like that, it was a blessing. I mean, I'll be forever grateful, and not just because it's the ever true, ever grateful piece of the fight song, but Purdue is a place that gave me many blessings, and I am incredibly grateful for the opportunity and for the people that I worked with. I would absolutely say, some of the best people in the country.
Well, we do have many listeners to this podcast who have aspirations to grow into leadership roles, and I think one of the things that you uniquely experienced was a lot of those 150 people who that day when you stood up were now reporting to you in one way or another, had been maybe people you had reported to or peers. And I'm curious to know kind of making that leap and if there were any lessons in sort of elevating into a leadership role where now you were the boss and trying to balance some of those pre-existing relationships, if you will, and sort of the blurry lines between friend and leader and peer and all of those things that maybe we all deal with. I would think it'd be unique in your situation, having started in a more junior role and been able to ascend all the way up without leaving the institution and going somewhere else.
Yeah, it's a great question, Brett. I'll say I remember never had I found this statement to be so relevant or true, but you've heard the phrase, "It's lonely at the top." It's so true because when you find yourself in a situation where you have a large team, where you have a team working for you, it's not appropriate that you blur the lines of friendship or that you hang out with some of these people socially, or that it's the simple things like, okay, is it okay to be friends on Facebook with people that work for you? I mean, we all struggle with these questions, or we all wonder about these things and what's the right or the wrong thing. I'm certain I crossed some of those lines because you do like the people that work with you. I'm not going to say I like them all equally, but gosh, I like them a lot. And in many cases, I thought I could see myself absolutely socializing with these individuals. They're fun, they're nice, they're kind. So it is a balance. I think there is an absolute balance. I think for me, and I think if you ask the people that work for me at Purdue, and I hope in sometime the people that I'm working with here at OU will share the same. I think people will come to realize I'm a very, very, very transparent person. I just have to believe that even if people don't want or can't take the truth is the best. It's easiest for me and it's easiest for the world if we could live in a space where there's more truth. And I think that at the end of the day, to celebrate everything. We celebrated success at all levels within our organization, and it just felt good. Who doesn't want to be a part of a good celebration, right? And in our work, there's plenty of things that can really get you down, and you can take personally, and it's hard. It's very hard work, and so I think it's important to celebrate and to rejoice. And my team has heard me say this. I used to say this often, we can all visit Pity City, but we can't stay. Like, no complaining, right? Like, we can't keep complaining. So I'm just more of a positive person. And I think that the more you can instill that in a culture, if you can create that kind of culture, I think it's just more successful for everyone.
I am going to borrow, we can visit Pity City, but we can't stay.
You
I
can have-
also feel like that could be a decent country song. There's something there. So you just talked about transparency. What does that mean? And I'm sure if I asked some of your former colleagues, they could probably give me some really clear examples. But maybe for your newer colleagues who you haven't had as much time to spend with yet, what does that mean? Because transparency, I think, is something that we can all say and aspire to, but in reality, it can be tough. But it's tough and fair is an okay combo. I mean, what's an example of where you might consider yourself more transparent than other peers or other leaders that you've gotten to know over the years?
Yeah. So when I accepted this assignment at Purdue, that's my final assignment at Purdue, I had watched, I had been obviously involved with others who had led and who were great. I'm not in any way disparaging or discrediting their work. But it was always interesting to me. It felt like there was this void of information as it related to our president. And I know people think, information is knowledge, is power, it's all those things, right? But so I would have regular meetings and or conversations with the president of the university, and they weren't all great. Of course, they're not going to be, I mean, he's got a big job. I have a big job. We're trying to do really big things. And I just had a philosophy that if it was relevant and it was important, even if the message wasn't great, I was going to share it. So when my team would get together once a month, I would give an update, and it would be things like, well, we went on this visit and this happened or that happened and this was good or this wasn't good, or the president has agreed that he's going to do this or he's not going to do this. And I just put it all out there. Because I wanted people to, first of all, I wanted people to see how real the president was. He was a wonderful colleague and a wonderful partner to me. And I wanted people to understand that many people didn't have access to him or didn't have an opportunity to personalize him. So I wanted to be able to help fill that gap. And then I just wanted people to know what was really happening. And there were times where I think it was more than they wanted or more than they could take or more than they felt comfortable with. But I think in the end, people grew to appreciate it and wanted it in the end.
I love it. When you think about the $2.5 billion campaign, favorite memory, top one or two, just things that really stand out as just being highlights of that experience.
Sure. Probably two, well, maybe three, I guess. There were three probably key events. I'll bundle two together because the campaign kickoff event, which happened in 2015, it happened a week after a significant family event. And I probably needed it more personally for me than I could have ever imagined. But I had been away from campus in the weeks that led up to it. And so I felt a little disconnected. And I actually just felt like my head wasn't in the right space. And I just remember getting in that room that night and I thought, oh, all is well with the world and I'm in the place I need to be. So there was that. And likewise, I will say that at the campaign finale, Brent, I know you met some of my colleagues, but Purdue probably had compiled one of the most sophisticated special events teams, I think, in the country. And our campaign finale, we had women hanging from tight ropes in the ceiling, pouring wine. It was incredible. And it was a chance to put a big bow on something that I felt very personally proud of. So that was an important evening for me. And then I'll just say, aside from that, when I think about 2.5 and where were some of my funnest memories, no surprise, I think, to the people that were there. Truly, Giving Day, our day of giving at Purdue. We called it Purdue Day of Giving, PDOG. We started it in, a lot of ways that people do, not knowing what we were doing, not sure if we could be successful. We turned it into an enterprise. The two individuals that were the architects for that are still at Purdue. They're incredibly talented. You know them well. It was a ride. And I remember every year when it was over, after you'd been awake for 40 hours or whatever the number of hours was, I remember coming home and being sad that it was over. And I thought, gosh, what's wrong with me? I should be so excited that I don't have to do this again for 364 days. But it was something that I considered to be really special in my time there.
Well, give us the headlines. When you think about Giving Day, I know that I have some stats here somewhere, but they were big numbers. And I think we've also gotten to know some of the folks at NC State. I know that they've collaborated and tried to and have successfully, learned from that campaign model. But what is it about that approach to Giving Day that is maybe different from the typical Giving Day results that we see, if you don't mind me asking, and
Sure.
sharing the secrets?
Well, and so when I left Purdue, I actually did a little bit of consulting with the University of Michigan Flint. If you go back and look, they had an incredible year last year. I'm really proud of them. And what really differentiates Giving Days is when you actually can bring the entire community together, and the whole campus understands it's Giving Day. They're all in. People are paying attention. They've got it on their screen. They're watching it. In the weeks leading up to it, everybody's social media feeds blowing up with all things related to your institution. And what really tips the scale is when you understand that there's going to be this component of work that happens online, but then there's going to be this real component of work that happens in the major gift space. And so when your major gift officers use that day as a way to close gifts and to provide them with that hard deadline, it's like the perfect storm. And so everything comes together. I used to also, and this is a managing expectations detail that I don't think any of us will ever solve, but at Purdue, when I worked there, Mitch Daniels would have always said, well, how much did we raise? And that would have been his measure for success for our Giving Day. And fortunately, the number had always raised itself. So I was thrilled it had grown, and I was able to answer that question, and he felt good about the number. But what I often reminded him and others was it was really less about the dollar and all about donor acquisition, because that's the key to why Giving Days are so important. If you can get people who traditionally aren't giving, and if you have to think about the avenues you use to solicit funds on those days, it's social media driven. So suddenly you're getting young people who aren't necessarily the typical donor at that point in their life. You're getting young people to give back. And if you can do that 2 and 3 years in a row, you've developed a trend in which they're going to most likely be annual donors. And I think that's the power of all these days.
Yeah, it seems like instead of it being donors or dollars, you've been able, and your team was able to do both in a way that really integrated major gifts into what sometimes could be that annual giving thing. And I think that's really the distinction. And others are trying to model it, but sometimes when you see the headlines of $41 million at Purdue, relative to quite a bit less at other institutions, it just tells me that integration and that deadline, as you described it, not to mention, if something then pushes past Giving Day, you've still got until June 30th for that fiscal year cycle to be able to bring things home.
Exactly. And for people that watch Giving Days, I'll say one of the call outs of that I think speaks huge volumes for Giving Days is at Purdue, the work that the bands and orchestra have done. I mean, they're a small but powerful team, but they set the tone. Every campus needs one of those. I mean, they're always the ones that win as many competitions as possible. They strategize on how they can win the competitions. They are uber creative, and they are all things Giving Day. They are the epitome of what makes Giving Day successful.
Love it. I don't think I've heard that, and appreciate you sharing. So you had an amazing run at Purdue. You took some time, you did some consulting, and you have now assumed the leadership role at a really pivotal and interesting time in the history of OU fundraising. Just tell me about the context, what inspired you to pursue the opportunity, whatever you're comfortable sharing, and kind of what you were excited about as you heard about the role.
Yeah. So when I stepped away from Purdue, I actually was contemplating retirement. Just wasn't exactly sure. And I was trying to imagine to myself, can I enjoy this work in another environment and in a place in which I didn't graduate? Because it was hugely important to me to be able to raise money at my alma mater. So I had a pretty long list of things that would need to happen to attract my attention. And OU really did check everything off the list, minus, as my husband reminds me, the geography. We had agreed we would only move about 6 hours from our home. And if you get the map out, it was a steady 12. But we made that move. The things that really caught my attention was the fact that the leadership at the university had made a decision to move the advancement organization to a private foundation, which I had also been involved with at Purdue, and I support and believe in 100%. It's the right thing to do, and it was
Why?
for me in a previous life, and it was
Why
right.
is that the right thing to do?
Because advancement organizations, from my perspective, really don't look and feel and operate consistently like a lot of things that traditionally happen on an academic campus. So when you think about just basic fundamental things, like an advancement organization needs to be flexible, we need to be nimble, we need to be able to make quick hiring decisions, we need to be able to move people based on their skill set, based on their life situation. We need to be able to do our work under a little more transparent or a little more confidentiality, I should say, than what you typically can do on the public side of an institution. And so it's just, there's a lot of real flexibility to define the organization when you can pull away from the traditional model of a public higher education facility. So that's why I'm a fan, and I've seen it work. It also allows you, I think, to come closer to honoring the wishes of your donors and really respecting the confidential nature of the work that happens. And I think that's an important component of it. So when I looked at OU, there was this move to a foundation. The university had just launched a strategic plan, which was incredibly powerful. And to be honest, and this was the thing that really struck me the most, when I left Purdue, I had a couple people contact me about a couple jobs in which the leader or the top person in the advancement organization left. And in most of these cases, the institutions were just hunkered down. We were in the throes of COVID, and they were saying things like, well, we're going to allow the advancement organization to be led temporarily by the IT person or by the person who is also serving in HR or whatever the case may be. And so essentially, a lot of institutions saw COVID as a place in which they just they clammed up, they saw that as a threat, or they saw that as a place where we're not willing to make a decision. We're not willing to make a commitment. We just need to ride the storm out. And actually the opposite happened here. I mean, OU, I don't know if they missed the pandemic message, but they just realized, like, look, advancement's super important. We really have to invest in it. We're really eager to find somebody to do a national search and to find somebody that can come here and lead this. And we know there's a pandemic, but it doesn't matter. We still need to do this. It's critically important. And so for me, that was a big draw. It speaks to the culture here. It speaks to the fact that they were not slowing down. They were not going to allow COVID to change their path. And it was the draw.
And you arrived in March of 2021, is that right?
Actually, it was April 1st. But yeah,
April 1st. April 1st. So we're a couple of months in. You have probably gone through this intensive, I mean, you've got to get to know your team, get to know the campus, get to know the culture, get to know the leaders, deans, the fight song. I mean, there's a lot that you need to get to know. Where are you in that process, and how do you even think about the amount of learning that must be associated with such a big job in such a new context?
Yeah, I will say that's the place I've underestimated. Starting over someplace where you just don't know so many things. It's hard. It's been eye-opening. It's been humbling. It's been daunting at times, but it's also fun. you didn't add to your list, but I'll add to the list. I won't just disclose why it's so important, but I had a major silly question early on. Here at OU, you also need to know the history of football inside and out. And I'm working on that, but that's probably where I've been the most lax. But
Is there
Brandon,
like a private football trivia coach that you can hire to help with these things, or how do we close that gap?
oh, I should for certain. I asked a question of our president. I'll tell you. I asked a question of our president who someone was, and it was a really famous football person. And he was like, "You don't know?" And I said, "No, I have no idea." So it is funny. Football's a big thing, obviously here, and everybody talks about it. So it's a part of the learning. But real, I mean, real life is the only way to do this is to just be here every day, to be in 11 and 12 hours a day thinking about it, reading, asking, trying to put yourself in every conversation you possibly can. And I leave a lot of conversations with little notes of like, I've got to Google this and I've got to Google that and I've got to figure out who this is. And I suspect in 2 years I might get past some of these little notes, but there's just a lot to learn at an institution of this size.
And I guess it also is just a balance of acknowledging you're probably never going to be the expert on all things OU, right? You're never going to know all of the famous names and places. It's hard, even if you are a part of a place for 20 years, to know all of that. Exactly. And so it probably just shapes a little bit around, there are probably certain things at OU that you wouldn't get in the weeds on that maybe you would have gotten the weeds on in Purdue because you were so intimately connected with so much of the history and traditions. And so I don't know, maybe that's just a different requirement, right? I mean, maybe it's just a different, like there can be benefits to having that deep knowledge, but I think there's obviously, the broader transparency, leadership, communication. No matter who the football stars are, we've got to be able to set some strategies and build culture and execute.
Yeah. I've decided, and I joked when the president was teasing me about not knowing this individual, I said, I'm really focused on learning my staff and learning our key stakeholders. And so I'll get there. I'll get to the football coaches, but I'm just not there yet, So, it's a little bit of it for me. One of the things that I made a priority when I accepted this assignment was that I was going to meet with everybody on my team individually for 30 minutes. And it took about a month to get through everybody. And it took a little bit of scheduling creativity, but it was worth it. It was important. I wanted to know where people were from, what their connection to the university had been. And it really, I hope they understand that I did it for maybe selfish reasons, but really because I do want to have a team in which I feel connection.
I love that. Any I don't know, just reflections on that whole process? Sounds like you could have started a podcast with all those conversations.
Fun. Actually, I said something the other day to somebody about someone and they were like, how would you know that? I go, well, they just told me that and they didn't act like it was a secret. So, it was fun. There was a common theme. People love this place. People that are here love this place. There's so many of our employees and so many on our team personally that went to OU and graduated from OU and just could have been anywhere and wanted to be here. I'm also struck by how many young alums, alums that would graduate and immediately start working at the university. There's a lot. And in fact, our team is made up of a lot of those individuals.
We asked you before the conversation today where the sector's over investing or under investing, and you just commented that you thought there were significant opportunities to invest in training and professional development. And I'm curious what made you respond that way and how you think about making some of those investments as you get to know your team and as you, I know you're recruiting right now. I actually saw quite a few positions posted, which is great to see after a year of freezes and furloughs and all of that. So, tell me a little bit just about your perspective on training and development and your hiring plans.
Sure. So for me, I just think training and development is so important. I've seen and heard of some really good and talented individuals who didn't stay in the profession because they doubted themselves. I mentioned earlier a little bit about self-doubt and how you can let that creep in. And this work is hard. It's not a job where you go home and you turn it off. You're always thinking about it. You think about it at all kinds of times of the day, and you're always wondering what you could do to make another connection or to reach out to someone else or to close an important gift. And so I do think it's really, really important to pour into people and to invest, because what I always say is I want my investment as a manager to equal my investment into my employees to equal what I'm asking them to invest in the job. And I think we're asking a lot of them. We ask them to be available. If you email people at night, they email you back, or they're on the road on a Sunday night or on a Thursday night at 10 at night. So I just think it's really critically important to invest in people. And that looks and feels differently to everybody. What's important to some people is not as important to others, but there are things that you can do. And I think it's always good to kind of understand what those different opportunities look and feel like for some individuals. There's some people that love and really benefit from going to conferences and or professional training. And then there are other people that have a different mechanism or an approach to what they would like to see in training. So I just think it's important to identify and create a platform of development opportunities and training opportunities that can align with a lot of different employees. It's not a one size fits all for me. So I do think it's important. And it's also, I think, in this profession where it's very competitive and people are always being recruited away to other jobs, I think it is something that you can point to say, this is what makes OU special. We're going to invest in you and we're going to make it possible for you to be successful. And we hope that will be different than what you might see in an opportunity outside of the university.
Well said.
Yeah, but I cannot miss the opportunity. As you said, we are hiring. We're hiring. We have probably 50 positions available right now. And
50 people. We've been doing a lot of episodes. We got 50 positions in OU.
Exactly. Some are entry level. We're looking for folks in prospect research. We're looking for folks in development services. We're looking for fundraisers. We're looking for people in corporate and foundation relations, play and giving. I mean, really, we are all across the board. And I say to everybody, Oklahoma is a pretty special place. I was surprised because I was born and raised in Indiana, but it's been a place I've fallen in love with quickly. And if you want to come somewhere and you want to be a part of something really exciting, we're getting ready to announce something really big in the next 18 months. So if you want to be a part of something really exciting and you want to work with a team and you want to have a lot of fun, this is the place.
I love it. That is what I'm talking about. No more furloughs.
No
50
more furloughs.
New hires. I love it. So as we conclude here, I do want to maybe just ask you this. 2 years ago in June, Zoom was not a big part of our life. Okay. Mm-hmm. A year ago, it was a huge part of our life. What about a year from now?
It's probably somewhere in between. I think what it's done for us in a very positive way is it has allowed us to realize that we can function as a society in ways that we hadn't before. And it's opened our mind and opened our possibilities of new and different ways in which we can behave and work and educate ourselves and do all kinds of things. And so I'm grateful for that. I think that I'm sorry it took a pandemic to help us get there, but I think that's a win. But the flip of it is, I think that the pandemic took a toll on a lot of people. People in this day and age are a lot more social than they want to give themselves credit for. I heard people that tired of being on the phone, or people that tired of being, plugged into their iPad or their desktop. Because people really do need and crave what you can only get in face-to-face and real interactions. And so in a business that is so deeply rooted in relationships, I think it will have changed us a little bit, but I hope that we find ourselves back into that space in which we're really sitting across the table talking to people on a regular basis about why they should make a gift to the University of Oklahoma.
Yeah, look, I think it is critical. And just, yesterday, actually, we reopened our office at Evertrue, and I got to see some folks on our team who I'd never met in person before. I got to reconnect with people who I've known for years, and it was really special. But at the same time, I know that we don't necessarily need that to be the exact same way it was before the pandemic, and not continue to make progress and grow and all of that. So I think your comments around the hybrid or the balance are accurate. I also think from a fundraising perspective, which we've talked a lot about, is given that all of us from the ages of 3 to 93 have been accustomed to now be a Zoom link away from one another. And I'm hopeful that, especially from a discovery perspective, and as we think about ways to engage more donors earlier in their life cycle, that there is a lot of space between, student caller making a relatively transactional solicitation and fundraiser getting on a plane and flying to XYZ city to do a discovery visit. And I think the in-between is going to continue to be a big area of opportunity coming out of the pandemic.
I agree. I really do. And I think the biggest thing that for me post-pandemic is I can probably tolerate some Zoom. I hope we don't go back to mask. And really, it's all selfish. I want to know when people are smiling. And I think a lot of people smile, and I think there's value in it. And it does a lot of things subconsciously to make people happier. And so not seeing smiles for the last 18 months has been the hardest part for me. So,
well, here's to seeing a lot of smiles in the next 18 months. And Amy, it's really just been so fun to reconnect and learn more about your journey. And it's a big job. And it sounds like you've got incredible support from the leadership of the institution to be able to have a hiring plan like that at a time when many folks are still maybe playing a little bit of defense. So best wishes. And if people want to stay in touch, LinkedIn, is that the best way to reach out to you, or any other medium you'd recommend?
Absolutely. I am on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook, but not as actively. And my email is super simple, anoa@ou.edu. Please reach out. I would love to hear from anyone.
Please do, everyone. Take Amy up on it. She's a great leader in the space, and I really appreciate you taking time to share with our audience.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, Frank. Great to see you.
All right. Thanks, Amy. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Ever true.